Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we begin this episode, a request. Software People Stories has been nominated for the Hubhopper Awards, and this is to request you to show your love for this podcast by voting for us under the business and entrepreneurship category. You can cast your vote at community.hubhopper.com/hubhopper-awards. Please also spread this in your networks to see your favorite podcast win. Thank you. In this episode, I am in conversation with my colleague Anantha Natarajan, known as Anand, a colleague and coach at PM Power Consulting. Anand shares his experience and perspectives related to coaching senior leaders and mid-level managers, how he had to rediscover himself and his approach while working with experienced managers and leaders, about the approach of earning the trust of one's boss, his thoughts on continuous flow of value, and the analogy of how he learns by playing bridge. Listen on. Hi Anand, welcome to the Software People Stories again.
Hi Shiv, thanks for having me on the program again.
So this time we will not do a formal introduction. I'm sure our listeners know you already and liked your earlier story as well.
Yeah.
So this is more about probably my curiosity as to how you went about doing some of the things that you have been doing recently and even earlier, how you've been leveraging your experience. One thing that I wanted to understand was, as a coach, when you are dealing with teams, the team level coaching versus getting into, let's say, the leadership level coaching or the middle management level coaching, was there any repositioning that you had to do for yourself as to how you presented, how you kind of connected and all that? And have there been any changes in terms of how you approached coaching and probably some techniques that you used and that worked for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting actually. Last probably for a couple of years, I've been working with leaders. And when I say leaders, mostly people in the middle. I think in the past, there was definitely, I was working with managers as well. But the focus was to, get the teams, Scrum teams working or Kanban teams, doing the right things and behaving the right way. And that was the focus, right? And in that process, we used to interact with leadership and then, guide them. But in the last couple of years, it's been more of actually not doing very little with teams and most of the work with the middle managers and the leadership, right? So that's been a bit different. And I think in some ways I had to sort of rediscover definitely my ways or my approaches and had to think a little bit more about what am I trying to do here. Because you're working with more mature leaders who had greater success with their past ways of working. So how do you bring in change there? So that way it's been different actually. Yeah.
So has your position, for instance, as a coach, we need to first establish that contract, right? With the teams, you're probably going there as somebody who brings a lot of experience. And like you mentioned, if these managers or leaders already have a successful track record or probably are comfortable with doing things in their own way.
Yeah.
How do you first engage and maybe disarm them so that it becomes a fertile condition for coaching?
Interesting, actually. See, I used to have this very strong coaching philosophy, like you find the solution, right? I'll ask you questions and you'll find solutions, right? And also when I used to work with teams, there was also a Scrum, right? Scrum had a good structure in place, right? Which their teams are trained on. But with middle, that's interesting. You should say, establish contract, right? So we talk about this all the time, right? Trustworthiness is about character and competence. What I found with the middle is they need to see competence first, interestingly, right? That's sort of what I realized without giving solutions. Okay. And I found leaders are also good with, they get principles, right? They've been operating with the principle And if I'm able to guide them with the principle rather than giving a solution, they get the principle and they're able to figure out solutions.
Okay.
So, but in some ways, I think they want to see an expert to start with. That's what I found. That competence part, right? They want to immediately feel, hey, this person is competent, and how you demonstrate that, right? Without creating a distance with buzzwords. You know what I'm saying, right? Using simple language. Like, we used to talk about, okay, look, the goal here is not to manage by metrics and exceptions. The goal is to manage flow value. I'll say something like that, right? Okay. And then they sort of think, oh, okay, there is something different here, right? I'm relating to what they've been doing and talking about something which I think is different. And they start asking you questions, and then, the discussion evolves. And all along, I think one thing I found is that you got to have a lot of respect for what they have achieved in their career and their track record. Sometimes, we go with, nose up in the air. Is that what we say? Right? We are superior wisdom, great wisdom from these coaches. And, they don't know anything. And we keep saying, middle managers are the problem, right? That has to be solved. But instead, I think I found I had to have a deep respect for them, which comes out as vibes, right? I mean, they sort of have to know that you respect them, for what they are and whatever they believe in. So that's one thing I found also different in my early approaches, right? So I think that created a foothold, or like you call, fertility condition. To me, that was the starting point. Interestingly, it was about competence, right? You demonstrating that, but also respecting them. I think that was the starting point. And I think maybe I'll talk about one of the first things I had to change myself, right, in me when I had to work with them was I call this like know my place. Because when you get into an organizations, like particularly large organizations, right? There is a larger transformation team. There are a lot of other coaches at different levels. There are some who are working with the top leaders in the organization. There are some working with the middle. There are some coaches who are working with the teams. This is on one side, right? The other side is we also have a lot of organizational dynamics, right, within the organization. So, for example, right, people will initially, I found, asking me a question, which are somewhat loaded. They're looking for an answer that they want from you, right? Which is probably somewhat unrelated to coaching. Let's say we do a meeting, and then someone will send a chat message separately, right? Asking, that's the stupidest thing we've heard. Isn't that right? Right? I mean, and you got to know your place, right? And then not react to everything and then not respond to everything. Or once I had a manager who called me private conversation, right? You said, look, along the way, can you give me some feedback on, how some of these managers are performing on the ground, right? I mean, to me, that's like it's difficult, right? That's not my place, right? So I found this knowing my place has multiple, aspects to it. And when we go into an organization, I realize I have to know there's a lot of history there, and the people have been there for some time. So you can get yourself into positions where you sort of compromise your role as a coach. So I found that's a good principle to know your place. And that was the first thing I think I learned. And I had to be careful what I say, what I say, or where I say what, where I react in that sort of a role.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned earning the respect.
Yeah.
So two thoughts that cross my mind are, one, is this something as an approach that will work for all of us when we have to deal with our bosses? Yeah, many times we hear things saying that, oh, my boss doesn't understand. My boss is always demanding. My boss is unreasonable. I mean, the blame is on the boss. Okay?
Yeah.
But if this approach of earning the boss's respect is something that all of us can do as individuals or as individual contributors, team members, do you think that would make the relationship stronger? And is it easy? And is it easy for a team member to do that?
So you're saying in an organization, the manager I'm coaching, they want to earn the respect of their manager. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, either they earning the respect of their managers. Basically, I'm just trying to extrapolate your approach of establishing your credibility through trust first.
Yeah.
Right. If the team members also take that approach with their leaders, or the managers you coach take it with their managers.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that actually. See, first thing when I go to I think, I always say this, right? First thing when I go to an organization, we see many things that don't seem right. And initially I used to think, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, or this person needs coaching. In fact, that was my first reaction when I meet with many of the leaders. I had to change that mindset for me. I had to start saying, look, my starting point in engaging with people is I have unconditional respect for them, right? Because they've reached that position where they are for some reason, okay, for a good reason, right?
Mhm.
So I think I start with that. So first thing that does is that sends vibes, right? They know this person is talking to me, not kind of in a condescending way, or not with any biases. In fact, he's biased towards respect for me as a starting point. Okay. So I think that is the first thing. I think I would suggest that to all managers, because when they are complaining all the time of their bosses, right? I mean, there's a bit of a history there. I guess as a coach, when I go, I'm new there. So for me, that is a starting point. But you talked about this earning the respect, people trying to earn the respect of their managers, right? I think that is vital. In fact, it probably, like, first principle I spoke about was know your place, right? The second one I found is help these leaders look great, not just in front of their people, also in front of their managers. I had this situation, right, where the manager, this person I was coaching, was being pushed by another transformation coach to do a few other things. And this manager came and said, okay, look, I find it's too much. What they're asking for is unreasonable, right? And I said, okay, look, why don't you talk to your manager about it? So look, I spoke to him, but he's not sort of giving me definitive answer, right? Because we are all part of this transformation organization and stuff like that. So he was looking for ways to sort of, how do I manage that? So eventually what I found out, I mean, through questions, I found out was the other transformation coach that was pushing was going to help this person's manager to achieve that person's manager's goals, right? Okay. So I
Wow.
had to ask him, look, how important is it for you to help your manager achieve his goals? And then the answer was very obvious. So that's in a way a means to help this person earn the other person respect. For example, like say, Shiv, you're my manager, right? I'm going to put in I'm going to put a lot of effort to help you achieve your goals, right? That will obviously earn the respect. So I found, at least in terms of attitude, hey, this person has the right attitude, helping us to achieve my goals. And eventually all this should align to organizational goals. Okay. So I found on the ground, I think the second principle is help these people look great, not just in front of their people, also with their managers, through their performance, not by managing visibility as a lot of people want to do.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, earning respect or even understanding and then helping, let's say, your manager succeed or who you're working with succeed, I assume requires a lot of empathy, right? To put yourself in their shoes and seeing why they consider something as a key factor for their success, etc.
Yeah.
And so, are there any practices that have helped you, or would you recommend anything for your coaches?
I think this is, I'm trying to think back about actual experience. Maybe two things come to my mind. One is, I tell them not to, I think generally, like this used to happen, right? In the middle of a call, there's a private conversation happening, right? Chat. I don't know, that's a habit I'm finding in many of the middle managers, right? Something is happening, there's another chat coming, right? They're looking for real-time coaching in some ways, right?
Okay.
And right, and the person is saying something is a stupid thing to say. What do I do with such managers? So I usually told people to sort of just listen or be patient, not to react like on the spot, right? We talk about that, right? That space between stimulus and response. I've usually told them, hey, let's just hear what the person has to say. I think that found that, because it just gives them I mean, remember, these people are also smart people, and many of the middle managers I found, they have good people skills. Yet, in that moment, they're getting frustrated, and so I found just asking them to hold off, right? Take a pause. Let's just listen, and maybe we'll discuss later, or stuff like that, right? That's what I usually do, and they've heard that, right? And some of them will just be quiet for some time. And when you're quiet, you got to listen. But you got to say it. I think I found you got to guide them without disrespecting the other person, right? The other manager. If I'm going to say, yeah, it's an idiot, but what to do? We have to hear what he has to say. Let's listen to him. That doesn't help, no, Shiv. So
Yeah.
I say, let's just listen, and then, maybe we can take a call offline. We can have a chat offline. Or if a commitment is expected on the spot, be courageous enough to say that, hey, you know what? Why don't you let me just think about what's really involved and come back to you. That sometimes is also needed, right? So I think in such cases, that also is needed. It's not really a pushback, and it's a bit of a buying time, right? And I think no senior manager would say no to that, right? Hey, as long as you're genuine in what we say, right? It all comes down to that shift, how genuine you are. And I think that is the key, how genuine you are in what you say and what you do matters a lot. You can't be thinking my man is an idiot and then trying to show empathy. I don't think that works.
Yeah. How does this remote working affect this? And is it easy to build this kind of a relationship and sustain this if you are only connecting remotely?
I think it's harder, right? That is my view. Okay. It is possible, but right, it requires a little bit more work. See, actually, if you look at it, whenever some of these engagements, team leaders are distributed, right? Often teams are co-located, but leaders are distributed, right? Even in my current engagement, the leaders are in 3 different countries, India, the US, and another European country, right? So what I'm finding is this remoteness is there even when you're working. I mean, for example, the 3 out of the 5 leaders that I was coaching in that team were in the US. I think remote working is not so much a pandemic thing to me. I think that's been a reality for a long time, but more so now. I think it's possible. I don't think there is any principle that is different for remote. I just found that with leaders, I always recommend calls with video on, because I think calls with video on is a simple principle. Everyone talks about it, but I think that to me makes a big difference, right? Because I can see the room, I can see the dynamics of what is happening and what's happening in people's faces and stuff like that, right? So probably that is the only thing I found is an important thing. Other than that, I think all the principles apply.
Okay. Switching tracks slightly, you also mentioned the flow of value.
Yeah.
As a leader, how do you first choose or decide what is value? And second, how do you get the team or probably other leaders also to agree on or converge on the same value? And since you mentioned flow, how quickly or how much flow we can create for that value?
Yeah, it's it's an excellent question, actually. Difficult one, because value being such a generic and probably also hyped up term, right? Thanks to consultants like us sometimes. I think so. So what I try to do is usually, when you go to large organization, they will talk about value at a very high level. They will say customer centricity. If you are delivering what the customers want ahead of faster, and then you are actually delivering value, right? And they may put some numbers to it as well. So, but what I found is when you work with the middle, you got to help them relate the idea of value in their program level, if you might say, right? Program meaning a collection of a product area or whatever, right? I found it is something you have to help them discover, right? What that is. So, for example, we've had it, in my engagement, maybe talk a little bit more practically. We had two levels, 2 ways of looking at priority. And actually, probably I should say three dimensions broadly. So one part of value is, are you doing things, or for example, if you're working on requirements of features, are you working on features that are aligned to the strategic expectations of the organization, right? Because strategy is sort of cascaded down. So is there an alignment to that? I think that is one of the key dimensions of value. So I help them, okay. So whenever you talk about a feature or a requirement, you have to think about, okay, which initiative is this aligned to, which is strategic in nature. So that is one dimension, right? The other is, and hopefully that will be aligned to high-level customer needs, which is the slightly longer term in mind. The second thing I found is alignment to what the customers is asking for now, right? These are not strategic things. These are requirements that are flowing in from customers or business, depending on the type of organization you are with, which are needed in the next 3 to 6 months, right? Or less than a year. there are things that they want. To me, that dimension is also important, right? So that sort of usually helps address some of the short to medium term needs as well. Because I found if you don't do that, the customer starts feeling, "Yeah, I'm not getting value." So that is, I think, another dimension, right? Which will help the customer achieve some outcomes. I found there's a third dimension, which is about technology and architecture, and leveraging trends in the technology space to create solutions that nobody is even thinking about. Customer is not thinking about it, and your management's probably not thinking about it, but you are able to think about it because, like in our teams, we had a chief architect, and we had some very senior developers who sort of knew what was going on. So I found and that's also a little bit longer term. I found if these three dimensions, all of them eventually adding to value to customer, right? And creating outcomes for customers. So that program is able to think about all these three dimensions when they're prioritizing and finding some sort of a balance. There's a trade-off, right? Short term versus longer term. And I found those three things, if they can think about all these three and then align, I found that will create tremendous value in the way they prioritize work. So that's basically how I have sort of guided them as well. And I found they relate to it. Specifically, what is value, they will figure it out. But I tell them, look, these are the three dimensions you look at, it'll come together.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I probably must ask you this question as we were talking. Some of the things that you described in terms of identifying the value, the flow of value, the communication and all that, since you're a bridge player, do you see any analogy between, let's say, the initial bidding process when you try to articulate some value that you and your partner want to create, and then the further communication and strategies that happen as you play?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got a partner that I've been playing with regularly for the last one. And we've actually been playing at some national level tournaments and playing with some really fantastic players. I mean, we are nowhere there we are not in the same league at the moment, but by playing with them, it's actually helping us. So actually, there are two things, right? Even in the flow of value, you asked another question: how do you make it happen on the ground? So I found all this talk of flow of value cannot stop at that level. It has to be operationalized. I think people need processes. That's what I found, right? Of how to actually make this happen. And here I found the partnership is crucial with the middle managers, right? Basically, I would say, they bring context of the organization. And then you, as a coach, bring your expertise. And it is a combination that creates that, you basically co-create the process. And once you've co-created that process, it is a matter of experiment. I keep telling them, look, let's just not get stopped. Let's not just get paralyzed by this. Let's just do it for one cycle and then see what happens, right? And that's exactly what in Bridge, my partner have been doing, right? Initially, it was about both of us agreeing on a bidding system. Bidding is about communicating with each other and trying to figure out, how many tricks you can take, right?
Yeah.
And how do you compete, right? That's what bidding is about. So there's a lot of trying to exchange information about each other, and there are bidding systems for that, right? So step one was, together agreeing on a bidding system. And that too, agreeing on a bidding system that is not too complex that, we become slaves to the system, and not make it too complex. And like in an organizational context, every deal in Bridge will throw a totally new context, right? Which is not addressed straight away by the bidding rules or bidding system, right?
Right.
And then that's when we also say, hey, okay, look, let's go with this an experiment and retrospect. In fact, in Bridge, me and my partner, if we play for an hour, we spend at least 20 minutes retrospecting.
Wow.
Let's say we play 10 deals in those 45 minutes, and then another 20 minutes analyzing those deals. How did we communicate? Okay, look, what do we need to change? Oh, is that what you meant in your bid? I didn't know. Oh, this is a situation we have never encountered before. So we need to change our bidding system. So the bidding system is like your processes, right? And tools. But that partnership, understanding, collaboration, that also is very important. And like in an organizational collaboration context, even in a bridge partnership, ego gets in the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen even at, players at very high levels, I mean, fighting with each other, like, and luckily me and my partner don't fight with each other, But even with this, we find our ego gets in the way. I think I played it right, but partner will say, no, look, you could have done this, no, and then we sort of learn about each other. You know what I'm saying? And I think the same thing has to happen in an organization. It's just not about the processes, right? It's also your behaviors and also collaboration. And that comes back to, what you talked about, empathy and trying to relate to each other. And we tell each other only one thing, as we have been learning, as we've been, trying to improve our bridge skills. We've been saying it's about learning. It's not about winning or losing. It's about learning. And I think the same thing I've been telling people, when you experiment something, you will learn something out of it and go back and change it. No problem. So that probably is there are some parallels there, Shiv.
Yeah, very nice. So in a way, logically, we've kind of come a full circle, starting with earning the respect and then making them succeed, collaboration, and the same things in Bridge about earning the respect of your partner, bidding together, communication, being transparent, and also refining your strategy with every trick. What should be what you do plus what others do. Very interesting. So one last question before we close for this time, and there are a lot more questions. I think we should do this more often, Anand.
Yeah, we should.
It's essentially about the flow of value as conceived by, let's say, these managers. And you also mentioned a little earlier that it is about making them succeed and not really managing perceptions.
Yeah.
So what would be some tips that you have for managers to actually make their work transparent to their leaders so that it both gives them an update, and also if they need any help, then the leaders can also understand that and then support the managers? Because we normally say the middle is always neglected. So you have any suggestions for the managers, the middle managers, to initiate something so that this gap can be addressed?
Actually, one thing I found, I'm again thinking, I guess there are many things that could be done. But one distinctive thing I learned in the last couple of years has been solve problems of your manager, right? Not your problems. Solve problems of your manager, I think is a great way to have a conversation with your manager about something, right? Get connected with them. Because what I found is, if you have a problem to solve, it's your problem to be solved. Sometimes there is a manager's expectation as, hey, that's why you're there, right? You're supposed to get this solved. You can go to the manager for coach, but you can go to your manager to get some guidance. But I found if you keep going to your manager for guidance, that borders on incompetence. Right? I mean, you don't know what you're going to do. Right? But I found that the greatest way is to solve a problem for your manager or as something that's in your manager's agenda. I actually saw this even in practice. It's a bit difficult for me to talk specifics, but if you have good rapport with your managers, so rapport, and I think that emotional intelligence aspects we talk about, like empathy, those things are crucial anyway, right? Those are, to me, like basics. So once you're good at that and you have respect for your manager, then a conversation can begin with your manager. So I think step one is probably have respect for your manager, then build rapport with your manager. Then the manager will share their problems with you. Now that's your opportunity, right? How can you help your managers solve their problem? Then you create a conversation. And the great thing about that is the manager starts thinking, hey, you know what, you're ready for the next level. I don't know, maybe that's one thing I found in practice and often people don't do.
Yeah,
does that make sense, Shiv? Yeah.
Absolutely. Also seems quite practical and pragmatic to do.
Yeah.
So on that note, Anand, we are really out of time for this episode. Thanks once again for sharing your insights and your experience. Definitely, we should do this more often.
Thank you, Shiv. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.
Bye.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
please subscribe on your favorite podcast client
and spread the word in your network.
If you'd like to share your story,
contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.